Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. Billy Corben and Alfred Spellman's Miami Doc Shop raconteur is behind a bunch of hits, including Cocaine Cowboys, ESPN's The U, and 537 Votes. For years, these young prophets have been predicting the vast disruption of Hollywood's old ways of doing business. Enter 2020, the most blindsiding year in the history of studio entertainment. Stick around. Subscribe to Full Disclosure on all fine podcatchers, including NPR One, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts at link fulldradio.com. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at FullDRadio. Joining me are Billy Corben and Alfred Spellman. No strangers to this show. Raconteur is the outfit. The Miami Doc House is behind a bunch of hit works, including Cocaine Cowboys, that landmark indie doc from 2006, ESPN's The U series, 537 Votes, which you can get on HBO Max. Now, Alfred and Billy kindly wrote the intro to my book, Hotel Scarface. I would say, how are you boys? But you're now men, or you're man children. How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
I got to tell you, you guys are always in my thoughts, but these past few weeks especially, I'm thinking back to that fateful Business Week profile I did of you guys. It was in the summer of 2008 when you were talking about the impending demise of the old Hollywood dinosaurs, that you can't go around spending thousands of dollars on floodlights and catering trucks and everything, that this was bound to collapse on itself. You have to be much more indie. You have to be much more direct to what the end user wants. You have to be platform agnostic. And I'm thinking about that as you're kind of in the throes of the streaming wars this week. So jump ball. Like, what do you guys think about everything that's happening after this year with the collapse of the cinema industry and the studios being forced to go straight to direct, like either Disney Plus or HBO Max?
Well, I think what's funny about it is that when we were talking to you originally about that back in 2008, we had just watched it happen to the recorded music industry. I remember as far back, our careers really begin right at the turn of the century, right in the year 2000. And the summer of 1999, two important things happened that informed both our thinking going forward and, of course, has now informed the 20 years since, which was Blair Witch Project had been released in theaters in the summer of 1999 and become a huge blockbuster. The first movie that had been shot on digital video, distributed theatrically to reach that blockbuster status. I think something like $145 million gross. So that really democratized the means of production, if you will. And that summer was the year we got a DSL line for the first time, and Napster hit. And as I was staying up night after night after night downloading the history of recorded music, because I thought that at any minute it would disappear.
I just want to make sure that the statute of limitations has run out on any crimes you're confessing to. Right?
Don't let Dr. Dre or Metallica know. But we had spent that August and September downloading just tons and tons of music. Like I said, because I thought that it would that it would end quickly, and that had kind of opened our eyes to digital distribution. So that one summer, we saw the transformation of production and distribution into the digital realm. And then, of course, that hit the recorded music industry very hard in the early aughts and into the mid-aughts. But by the time we spoke in the summer of 2008, Robin, DVD was still sailing along. In fact, Cocaine Cowboys, our second documentary, our first big hit, if there's such a thing in the documentary world, sold a ton of DVDs at retail at places like Circuit City, if you can remember something like that, or Specs or Tower Music. And so we were right on the cusp of the collapse of physical media, which is what the Great Recession did to the DVD industry in 2008 and kind of forced the shift into streaming. Remember, Netflix went from being a mail order company to a streaming company within a couple years, shuttering their division of making originals called Red Envelope, because, of course, that's what you received your DVDs in at the time. And so the 12 years since then has been the transformation, the ongoing transformation of the film and television industry to the point where we are now, where we've essentially seen the collapse of the cinema business.
And once again, the pandemic accelerating, I think, the organic market force, where it was already headed. And I think Alfred's right that anyone 20 years ago who didn't see the writing on the wall and start to adapt or contemplate how to adapt, as Netflix did pretty rapidly. I think at that point you were basically just a dinosaur cursing the meteor as it hurtled toward the earth. You know, you weren't ready for what seemed to be a very obvious shift, really, in not only the advancement of the technology, but in the behavior of the audience. You know, when Warner Brothers made its announcement that they would be premiering, 17 tentpole, big budget theatrical releases day and date in theaters and on HBO Max, I was pretty thrilled in that I will see no fewer movies in the theater next year as a result of this decision, but I will see more Warner Brothers movies because they're allowing the audience to make a decision as to how we want to consume our content. And I have no doubt that as things get safer over the course of 2021, that there will be a market for, a particular audience who will want to experience these movies, in that immersive, big screen environment. As for me, I prefer to, I prefer to be on my couch.
Well, let me ask you, from a businessman's perspective, how have you always been able to afford to be meh about the box office, specifically the cinema going experience, going back to 2005 and 2006, where you guys were you were nonplussed. You were not really bothered about the fact that there was rampant DVD piracy. You found your stuff in the flea markets, that people were burning it and spreading it around, that it was not such a zero-sum existential threat to you as you saw Christopher Nolan this week calling out Warner Brothers for disenfranchising so many thousands and thousands of movie industry employees.
Well, the absurdity of the business really struck us in 2006 as we were preparing for the Cocaine Cowboys theatrical release. It had struck us earlier than that, but this was really the absurdity of it, which is that you spend the most amount of money and the most amount of resources to market your film in the theatrical window when it is available to the fewest number of people. So if you're particularly in the indie film business or the documentary, feature documentary business in particular, where your film comes out maybe in New York and LA, but you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to promote it and spread the message. And of course, this was kind of still at the dawn of the internet, certainly the dawn of the social internet age. More and more people would find out about it across the country. But if you weren't in a city that had a theater that was showing the movie 4 times a day at the times they specified, you didn't have the opportunity to see it. And by the time you did, whether that was on television or DVD, it was months later and you've forgotten about it because you're paying attention to the movie that's currently being marketed theatrically.
And Alfred, not just particular place, particular time, but weather permitting, of course. Like people's decisions about whether or not to leave their home. I mean, you're at the mercy of so many variables that are out of your control. And of course, by the time Cocaine Cowboys reached theaters, it had already exploded in the bootleg market. And I have to thank you, Robin, for referring to Cocaine Cowboys in your introduction as a, quote, landmark indie doc, end quote, rather than the more common cult classic is the term we hear very often, which I always say the definition of a cult classic is a movie that everyone has seen and hasn't made any money. So and for a while that was certainly Cocaine Cowboys. But what we discovered was through the bootlegging process that our audience, on that doc anyway, was not in the movie theater. You could just look at the grosses to determine that. But our audience was in the flea markets. Our audience was in the bootleg market in strip club bathrooms or wherever, or the parking lot of Walmarts, wherever bootlegs were sold. And so that's where our audience was. So who are we to say to our audience or, our fans, like, no, you can't see content the way you want to see it. You have to see it the way that we want to see it.
You did want to get paid, obviously. Yes, you wanted to prime the market for future releases and whatnot, but you were theoretically depriving yourself of that chunky first-run DVD sale or first-run movie ticket sale.
Well, we weren't depriving ourselves of anything. The market decided. We didn't bootleg our own movie. Those were fans. Those were people who loved the doc and loved our work. So I guess our choice at that moment was we could go the way of, the recording industry and I guess start to sue our fans, to stop it. But how do you stop it? It was already they burned it down onto one DVD-R, it was being burned onto tens and hundreds of thousands of DVD-Rs. So really, you couldn't put the genie back in the bottle at that point. So I think we just needed to. I mean, was it a costly lesson? Perhaps, but it was a lesson that we learned and realized that we had to adapt or die.
And to illustrate for you guys how much this worm has turned, if you take the multinational media colossus, the Walt Disney Company, parent of ESPN, which you guys have dealt with for your 30 for 30 series, The U. By all means, this is a cataclysmic year for Disney. Its theme parks are closed even when they open. People are not exactly psyched to go and jam themselves onto monorails and boats. And the advertising industry has taken a huge hit, so that's hurt them in ABC. Live sports have been very perilous. But they do have Disney Plus, which is losing them money, their straight-to-streaming service. And the subscriber additions during the pandemic have been far chunkier than expected. So they're losing more money than expected in the short term. And here you go. We're at the end of 2020, and the stock is near an all-time high. The company is worth $315 billion. How, if I had predicted to you that they would have learned it this way, because they were notorious in the past for not wanting to send things directly to the streaming service, for staggering it as much as possible to get as much money out of theatrical and DVD before the masses and the plebes got to stream anything.
Well, I think we're also talking about two different businesses here to some degree, obviously. I mean, Billy and I have been in the independent film and feature documentary business, and certainly Disney is not in that business. So there is a market, and there will probably continue to be a market for event, theatrical, big special effects features when and if we all want to sit in movie theaters again. I think it would be wrong to say that the theatrical experience will completely disappear, but it will become more curated, and it will become just a smaller piece of the pie. I think in the same way that bookstores, the big chains, Borders and Barnes and Noble, Walden Books and B. Dalton from our childhood no longer exist. The indies do, because they figured out new ways and new models. So I think you'll see the same thing with indie cinema doing the same thing, trying to discover how to attract people to that theatrical experience. But from the perspective of Disney, certainly what they are now realizing is that the people you want to be in business with are not necessarily the cable companies or the satellite telcos or the internet providers. You want to be in business with your customers. You want to have the relationship directly with your customer. You want to know who they are, what they consume, how they consume it. And that's the secret sauce that Netflix has been employing for the past almost 10 years now, a little less, in determining how they commission entertainment and what they're going to commission, because they have the data, they have the numbers, and it's not a sample. It's not sampling 1,000 people or 10,000 people and trying to extrapolate out what the entire country is watching. I remember back at the dawn of the tens when Arbitron, the radio rating service, switched to people meters, where they would clip a little device onto your belt to determine exactly what it was you were listening to, rather than depending on the diaries. And all of a sudden, radio stars and talk radio hosts who were insanely popular for decades, all of a sudden, when we got down to the actual empirical data, realized that, boy, they weren't as influential, or they weren't as popular as people had thought. So I think for Disney, it's a matter of being able to not only sell them on the subscription video on demand service, but also then being able to package that into theme park tickets and vacations and all sorts of other add-ons, across the spectrum of businesses, their portfolio of businesses.
I don't know much about Wall Street other than they don't know much about Main Street or the real world. But they are very often attempting and not too bad at predicting the future. And I think that in the case of Disney, Alfred's been talking a lot about pent-up demand through the pandemic. And once we get on the other side of this thing, maybe by the summer or the fall, hopefully at the latest, a lot of people will want, who have disposable income or any income at that point, will want to go out to bars or clubs or live music events and theme parks. And so I think Disney and Wall Street are anticipating that pent-up demand for basically their vacations is what they're selling, because they're not just selling theme parks. They're selling concessions. They're selling hotel rooms. They're selling meals. And I think that's the streaming model for them as well. Remember, in their theme parks, they are the producer, distributor, and exhibitor, right? All the money is theirs. They have everything but an airline, to get you to Disney. And,
they used to have a cruise ship too.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. Well, other than that, and the gas stations along the way if you're driving on the Florida Turnpike to get there. But otherwise, Disney is the producer, distributor, and exhibitor, theoretically, in their theme park business, and that's what they are now in the streaming business. They are, and as we know, a lot of the big time streamers are heavily leveraged, and just in terms of being able to keep up with the licensing and original content demands of their subscribers. But the reality is that Disney has an extraordinary library that more so than any of the other streaming services, that is entirely theirs, that they control and own outright, that is incredibly valuable to their subscribers, and they're creating some outstanding new content, and so. They obviously have an edge or are as close to a competitor with Netflix as anybody else probably can be at the moment, which is why the move by Warner Brothers and AT&T and HBO Max is so bold.
Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. You're listening to Billy Corben and Alfred Spellman. They are the founders of the Miami documentary house Raconteur, which is nearing 20 years of work.
Yes, you just made me feel really old.
Tell me about the HBO Max experience, because 537, you're very much talked about, Doc, about the 2000 election fiasco in Florida and everything that went down in the recount. That was initially offered on HBO, but then it lived its long life on HBO Max, the streaming service. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, this project was, so 537 Votes began as an idea in our office back in August of 2019. We were sitting around 15 months before what I considered to be Billy considered to be the most consequential presidential election of our lifetimes and maybe in American history. And we were debating what we were going to do and how we were going to get involved, what we would do to affect the outcome. And so in talking about it, we started talking about the upcoming 20th anniversary of the 2000 election fiasco in Florida. And we had an assistant at the time who was born in 1990. So she was 10 years old at the time. And I said to her, well, what do you know about the 2000 election fiasco? And she's a Floridian. She was in 5th grade at the time. And she knew a couple things, didn't really kind of know the scope of the story, knew some keywords like Chads. And I said, well, do you know that the entire election was decided over 537 votes? And she was shocked. And we said, wow, this is really interesting, because there's obviously a large percentage of voters, usually younger voters, who are apathetic and think that, well, their vote doesn't really count. And so we said, well, we wanted to know how many Americans were situated like that. So we said, well, how many Americans were born between the years 1990, when she was born, and 2002? Which would have made you 18 to vote for the first time in 2020. And the number astounded us. The answer is 54 million Americans were born between 1990 and 2002. And so when we decided to make 537 votes, we said, well, this is who we're making it for. This is our stealth get out the vote campaign. If you think that your vote doesn't count, you don't know the story of what went down in Florida in 2000. And so we didn't have a buyer. We didn't have a financier. We had an idea, and we said, we're going to focus this on Dade County. We said we needed to do a new take on the 2000 election because it had been so examined and lampooned over the past 20 years. What was going to be the fresh insight? And the fresh insight we wanted to bring was examine this theory that essentially what happened in Dade County, Miami-Dade County, over the course of the year 2000 swung the presidential election. So looking at the Elian Gonzalez custody fiasco and marrying that to the events that happened in the recount in Dade County, specifically culminating in the so-called Brooks Brothers riot, we were able to tell this story of this cautionary tale of the election.
How and why? Walk me through selling this or merchandising it from idea to delivery to, do you put it out for bid? Do you say, listen, I know a guy at HBO Max who would be hot for this?
That's right. Well, the idea basically is that we would shoot some interviews on spec. We would basically go out, finance these interviews, produce them, and then cut in what's known in our business as a sizzle reel, kind of a trailer, a highlight reel, essentially, kind of a proof of concept of what the doc would be. And so through the course of the winter, January and February 2020, we were shooting. In fact, we shot the very last interview for the doc on March 12th in Santa Barbara, California, with Anne Louise Bardak, the day basically after the entire world shut down on March 11th. And so Billy and I then flew back to Miami the next day, March 13th, again, with no buyer, no film, but and of course, a rapidly approaching deadline, because the whole purpose was to get the film out before the election. And so, and now with the
and by the way, that's a very disadvantageous position, let's say, going to buyers basically with the demand, so to speak, of a release date. You know, really, it's up to the distributors when and how they want to put out a movie. But we were kind of, in a way, almost limiting our options because, you know, there was a lot of buyers who had their schedules set, you know, or had their releases set for, September, October, November. But we were really looking for like a late November release for the documentary. So to Alfred's point, late October release, you know, ahead of the November election. And so we were kind of self-limiting, you know, our options at that point, in addition to running out of time both to cut a sizzle reel, sell a movie, and finish it in time for that. So we had set a lot of very heavy limitations for ourselves.
So this became a kind of a year-long sprint for us to finish the movie. And what had happened in the intervening time is we had heard that Adam McKay, the Oscar-nominated writer-director of Vice and The Big Short, was a fan of Screwball, our previous doc. And so we reached out to Adam, knowing his politics and what his current interests were. And we showed him and his partner, Todd Schulman, the sizzle reel, and they loved it and said, we'd love to get on board.
Two things there I have to say. First is Adam won an Academy Award.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's right. So
yes,
winner, not a nominee.
For Best Adapted Screenplay. Right. Yes, for Best. And in addition to many other nominations for the screenplay, the adapted screenplay for The Big Short. And we, and Alfred and I, in conceptualizing, shooting, and starting to putting together the sizzle reel for 537 votes, were already regularly referring to the documentary as Adam McKay-esque.
Oh.
That was a very common term around the office. And,
walk me through this part, Billy and Alfred. You've had experience with, we talked about ESPN, which is owned by Disney, HBO Max, which is where Screwball was. You've dealt with Mark Cuban and Magnolia. You've been full indie to whatever, PlayStation, flea market, DVD rips, DivX. You've now dealt with all the big players, clearly HBO Max. You are the true content maker and you can afford to be agnostic. And there I failed to mention Netflix, right? So how do you decide at a time of multiple platforms and multiplying platforms? There's Hulu, after all, which is owned by Disney. How do you decide where it ends up or who takes it, or do you care?
Well, we really don't decide per se. We did decide, I should say, though, in that, like we had already, as I just said, we had already kind of limited our options by kind of almost making certain demands. Like we really wanted it out ahead of the election, you know, and again, that there's only so many buyers who were willing or able to accomplish that on such short notice. Because Alfred, when did we finally take it out? When was it? It was late.
It didn't go out until July. We had decided to partner with Adam and Todd, and Adam and Todd had a deal. Their production company had a deal at HBO. Had a first look deal at HBO, and we were and are currently working on a project with Netflix.
Would you explain a first look deal for our listeners?
Sure. A first look deal is simply a deal that established producers, directors, writers can obtain with a studio, a production company, a financier, which basically pays your overhead, covers your office, an assistant, gives you some development money, pays you a salary, essentially. And in exchange for that, that studio or that financier gets a first look to finance any of the projects that you are developing. So some of them are exclusive, which basically means that if you have a first look deal with HBO, an exclusive, and they pass, then you can't take the project anywhere else. Some of them are simply a first look. You get a first right of refusal, essentially. So they're structured all different ways. But we had, so Adam and Todd had this deal at HBO, and we were working with Netflix, and we said, well, you know, one of our goals, particularly with this project, was to make it available as widely as possible to the biggest audience. And so that really meant that, okay, we don't really necessarily want just a linear cable channel deal where the doc would play at 9 p.m. on X cable channel and then, repeat a couple weeks later maybe, but not really be available. We were looking for a place, particularly, I think, a streamer in this case. And fortunately, we were able to do the deal with both HBO, the linear channel, and of course, supplement that the next day with the doc appearing immediately on HBO Max. And so it was really the best of both worlds because...
You have to do these separately, right? It wasn't understood that if it appears on HBO, it also resides on HBO Max, right? Those are separate negotiations?
It does. Well, though they have separate executives and separate structures, HBO content is now appearing. HBO from the linear channel is now appearing on HBO Max sooner and sooner. I suppose that's part of AT&T's mandate in terms of uniting the linear channel and the streaming service, and to make that connection tighter and and more beneficial for both.
I will admit, I was very confused. Even when we were preparing for release, I think several times, Alfred, I said to you, we're on the linear network, right? Like, we'll be on HBO proper before HBO Max. And I was like, yes, we will. Because they were really, they're heavily promoting HBO Max, and rightfully so. So I was and I was also confused when I became an HBO Max subscriber earlier this year with my HBO subscription, and my cable, HBO premium cable subscription. And so I wasn't exactly sure. At first, I think they were marketing it as like the new HBO on the go or what, and I wasn't really sure what the difference between that and on demand, HBO on demand was. And it's taken me, honestly, the better part of really the fourth quarter of this year to kind of fully understand it. And I think, again, that's why the move with the 2021 Warner Brothers slate is so bold, because it's like, oh, that's why I need it.
Let me explain that. Hollywood Reporter has it in a big feature. On December 3rd, in a move that blindsided its business partners and sparked threats of lawsuits, Warner, the studio, announced that it would apply a hybrid release plan to all 17 films on its 2021 slate, including event movies like The Suicide Squad and Dune. When we discussed it with medical experts and looked at it diligently, said an executive, it became more apparent that there will continue to be a real impact on the business through the entire year. So we made the plan to have a reliable year-long strategy. Let me continue. The financial implications of this. While studios are looking to the future, the present is dire. The 2020 domestic box office will struggle to hit $2.3 billion, down nearly 80% from 2019, the lowest level in at least 40 years, and that's without adjusting for inflation. Now, the interesting thing is that, from a self-disruption perspective, there is a significant interim cost, whether you're Warner, whether you're Disney, and kind of disrupting yourself, as there was with Netflix when it went from a red envelope DVD mailer to becoming a bona fide, content shop itself. Warner, the HBO Max program, as these anxieties within the entertainment divisions were playing out as parent company AT&T was seeking to justify its $85 billion 2018 acquisition of Warner Media, which has added to its heavy debt burden and done little to boost AT&T's stock price, even amid layoffs of more than 1,000 this year. It's really a leap of faith that you have to make. And as you mentioned earlier, Billy, this was, people were prodded in making this leap by the pandemic, but it's certainly costly in the near term and the intermediate term.
Well, yeah, but I think, first of all, I have to say, as documentarians, we don't necessarily customize our projects for a theatrical experience. Our audience is much more likely to be at home, streaming, on demand, etc. So I appreciate the position of filmmakers and artists who go through an incredible amount of trouble to create immersive storytelling, big worlds that are best experienced on a big screen, with extraordinary, state-of-the-art sound and maybe even in a collective experience with an audience. I understand that. The reality is now we have the option in 2021 with Warner Brothers titles. Again, if you feel safe and you want that theatrical experience, it's opening day and date. As for me, I'm much more likely to opt for the HBO Max experience. As I said before, this decision by Warner Brothers will have zero impact on my decisions, my movie-going decisions next year. I will see no fewer movies in the theater in 2021 as a result of this move, but I will see more Warner Brothers movies than perhaps I had planned to see because they'll be immediately available to me at home. And that's how I choose to experience these things. To be perfectly honest, Alfred had used the example of kind of, the big bookstore chains versus the more agile and creative independent bookstores. And I think we've seen that with the major exhibitors as well. AMC and Regal, et cetera, were very slow to respond and adapt to moviegoers' needs. The experience, as the price was going up, the quality of the experience of going to one of these megaplexes has deteriorated precipitously over the last 20 plus years. Whereas you've seen some other upstart companies, not exactly profitable, but things like, iPic and those types of premium kind of adult movie-going experience. I don't mean adult movies, but movie-going experience more customized to adults where they have, they serve
drinks,
full meals. Yeah, cocktails, right? A full bar, full meals at your seat, and have a more adult experience. A night out at the movies that could cost you $200 or so, but that's all dinner and a movie in one, and cocktails, all in one. And so I think those will be more likely the types of businesses that will survive, and likely the IMAX, which provides its own, kind of, again, big screen immersive experience that I think a lot of these filmmakers are excited about. But then if you look at Warner Brothers, they were the first people during the pandemic to release one of their big budget tentpole movies with Chris Nolan's Tenet in August. They did it in good faith to try to keep exhibitors open and in business and generating some revenue. I think it did not perform the way they had hoped. So this is a calculated risk on their part. I think it may pay off with HBO Max subscriptions.
Also, two big points on the pushback from the creative community and from the talent agencies that we've been seeing. And these two points
take Chris Nolan. Critical. Billy just mentioned Chris Nolan, and that is, you guys are still a slim, lean doc house, right? And you kind of do it on the fly, and you do it sometimes on the seat of your pants when you have to get it in, like you were talking about this summer with 537. But this guy's the antithesis of that. This guy does it bigly. This guy does it with massive budgets, massive crews, overruns and everything. And he has a huge lament, and he's saying that I will never work with Warner Brothers again after they did this. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I don't want to speak or speak to Christopher Nolan's motivations or his position on this specifically, but I want to say something larger about the creative community, and it's an important point to understand, is that for decades now, deals for actors and producers and directors and writers in many cases have been predicated upon bonuses for theatrical performance. And the reason why that was primarily is because theatrical revenue is one of the very few transparent data points that exist in the entertainment industry. You open up the newspaper on Monday, you know what the top grossing films were from the weekend. So it was something that agents and managers and lawyers in the notorious Hollywood accounting system could simply say, you can do whatever creative tricks you want, but we know what the gross is. It's reported here. And so bonuses for performance will be based on those grosses. So I think there is some pushback to this plan and to plans going forward based on the kind of the desire to continue to perpetuate the existing business model. The second issue is the creative community's concerns, rightfully so, over the past 20 or 30 years as we've seen corporate consolidation in Hollywood towards self-dealing. And in fact, there's been major litigation. There's the litigation that over the AMC show, The Walking Dead, about how AMC licensed, the production company licensed the film to the channel to, whether or not those deals were arm's length deals. In this case, you have Warner Brothers licensing films to be distributed on their subsidiary streaming service. So are you getting a fair market value for those licensing rights? And does that cut off the theatrical flow altogether? And so I think that a lot of the concern is predicated upon that, the self-dealing concerns, as well as these, how are we going to structure deals? And also because Netflix really set the bar for lack of transparency when it comes to streaming statistics. Now, occasionally on earnings calls or press releases, you'll hear how particular Netflix titles do. But overall, we don't get streaming ratings. And streaming deals are basically predicated not on number of streams or number of views like a Spotify deal for music, but are simply a term license, 18 months, 24 months, 30, whatever the term is. So this is having the effect of upending 20, 30, 40 years of business practice. And I think that a lot of the concern, though, not short selling the creative concerns that creatives might have here in terms of seeing things theatrically, I think a lot of this is an underlying business concern.
Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. You're listening to Billy Corben and Alfred Spellman. Raconteur is their Miami documentary house. It's behind a bunch of hits, including Cocaine Cowboys, ESPN's The U, 537 Votes, which is available now on HBO Max. Alfred and Billy kindly wrote the intro to my book, Hotel Scarface. I do have to ask you, jump ball again for either of you, because we're talking about a multitude of streamers, and there are huge laggards like Viacom and the others are like the kids in the back row saying, oh, what about me? What about me? Belatedly coming to the OTT game. Aren't you feeling login fatigue at this point? I mean, how many different people want to hit me up? It's not just, the old cable package you guys are talking about and crushing my $120, $130 bill into several different streaming accounts, but it's Spotify. It's what is my book budget? Gosh, everybody's asking me. Hulu, it's not just Disney Plus, but Hulu, ESPN hasn't figured out a better mousetrap. Viacom is like, wait, don't forget about us. NBC Universal has a Peacock streamer. I mean, at some point, aren't you just recreating the cable dial?
Well, I think what's interesting is this transformation over 20 years that we've seen. The buzzword in the aughts, the buzzword was unbundling, right? We are unbundling the album into songs. Via Napster and then the iTunes Store. We are unbundling newspapers from a package of articles with advertisements into individual articles that you read online. Unbundling of the cable bundle. We want a la carte. So there was a big move towards unbundling in all of our entertainment and media consumption in the aughts. And then what happened is, all of a sudden, when you were being proposed to purchase a la carte via, like, for example, video on demand or individual songs, there was some pushback on spending 99 cents a song and whether that was a value proposition that made sense, or whether I'm going to spend 10 or 15, or in the case of like an ultra VOD model where it was a day and date thing, $30, $40 for a particular title. And then when Spotify launched and then Netflix launched, you all of a sudden had a bundle again, a subscription price. And it was when Spotify launched with that subscription model for music that I said, okay, this is just going to be a race to the bottom. All of these other windows are going to collapse now back into a streaming model because we're not going to pay for a la carte content. And so that's exactly what's happened. Now we are, as you put it, Robin, we now have all these streaming services, and all of a sudden they kind of become a bundle unto themselves. So we watch the unbundling happen of content, and now we are seeing the rebundling just in a different way, a rebundling around subscription. And I think that is ultimately where we end up here in all of our media consumption. And so the question is, unlike music, where your goal is to have your song on every streaming service, unless you're Jay-Z and you're an equity investor in Tidal, I suppose, on the film and television side of things, it's all about exclusives. And so Netflix wants licensed content exclusively. Hulu wants licensed content exclusively. So you're right. Now all of a sudden you have to subscribe to all of these streamers, and who knows what Viacom is going to end up doing. It seems like Viacom is headed in the direction of ad-supported video on demand, with Pluto. So, that's I think probably the next frontier. Oh,
and the short answer don't even get us into Quibi, right?
Nobody's in Quibi anymore. You don't have to worry about it.
We don't have to get into it. But I think what's funny is that, like, the short answer is there's just too many of them. I mean, like, I turn on the TV, they want to sell me Discover Plus and AMC Plus. And first of all, I already subscribe to these cable networks through my cable subscription. And I got to say, for the longest time, I could never figure out the cable business model and why it was ever so successful. The idea that, we pay for all of these channels, whether we watch them or not, or want them or not. I mean, it would be like going to your supermarket every month and, you get a shopping cart and they put whatever they want into your shopping cart, and you get to put in a few extra premium items that you actually have to pay extra for. And then you give them $200 and you leave. What kind of business model is that? Nobody would do that. Nobody would pay for all of these products that they're not using, which is what we all do. Those of us who are still subscribed to, to cable every single month. And the reality is, I don't know if it's the good old lazy American in me. You refer to it as a login fatigue. Now I'm just like, oh, would someone just package these for me? Just tell me, just put them all together into one so I can just pay $200 and just get what I, and get everything I need and maybe a few extra things that I don't need, but just so I don't have to figure out all these subscriptions anymore. It's absurd and it's untenable. And I think, as you saw with the, to quote Jay-Z, grand opening, grand closing of Quibi, they're not all long for this world.
Let me understand something. Was the appeal to an AT&T to go out and lever itself up, as you'd mentioned, Billy, to take out an enormous amount of debt and pay a huge premium for Warner Brothers and the HBO catalog and everything that you see on HBO Max now? Is that for the company to make its wireless plans more difficult to cancel? I mean, are you hearing from people that they get AT&T subscribers, for example, get to watch your Doc 537 for free? Is that understood?
Listen, it's what I said. It's Disney as producer, distributor, and exhibitor. And listen, now I think the way this is all going to end theatrically is not just with the kind of premium boutique exhibitors, but with the end of the Paramount consent decree, there will be Amazon movie theaters and Netflix-owned movie theaters and Disney. There already are some Disney-owned movie theaters. You won't need AMC and Regal because they will, and to Alfred's point about the transparency, that's where it's going to all end up, is there's no more antitrust rules basically governing the ability of studios to own movie theaters and exhibition companies. So I think that's what it's about. I mean, AT&T provides the phones, they provide the pipes. You have AT&T, internet service at home. They provide your mobile service. They provide your cable. They provide, with DirecTV, they provide your content. And it's just, it's to keep as much of your money in the parent company as humanly possible and control sort of every element of your communication output in and out.
The ubiquitous company, the one with, until recently, I think it had the biggest market capitalization on the planet, is Apple. Apple also has a side gig as a film studio. And you saw some controversy this week in that you see Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, stuff leaks out that we don't want to offend China and we might not want to have, graphic nudity in certain films and everything. How do you get your head around Apple as a device maker, as the chief device maker, is also a content colossus?
I don't think Apple as a financier of content is long for that for this world. The controversy actually began last year with a documentary about sexual assault in the music business that dealt with some allegations against Russell Simmons that Oprah Winfrey had signed on to executive produce, and was going to premiere at the Sundance Film Festival last year. And when there was some pushback, Oprah dropped out, and as a result, Apple dropped out of distributing that documentary. So we've seen this. We've seen Apple do this a couple times now, and I just think it is a culture issue. If companies that are produce content are media companies that have a strong devotion to the First Amendment and to expression of creatives. And I just don't think that's necessarily Apple's culture. And frankly, I'm surprised. I would have bet probably 2-3 years ago that Apple would have bought Netflix. And that's how they would get in the streaming business, the same way that they bought Beats by Dre to get involved in the streaming music business. The idea that Apple is going to be a creative partner in the creation of content just never rung true from a corporate culture perspective to me.
Alfred and Billy of Raconteur, in the 10 or 12 minutes or so we have left, I would be remiss in my duty as host of Full Disclosure and as a fellow fan of the genre you guys made a huge name for yourselves covering at, Cocaine Miami. Tell us about the next installment of Cocaine Cowboys, Los Muchachos, the saga of the Willie and Sal gang. I mean, this is a story that's very near and dear to all of our hearts. I'm amazed when I step back from this that this story effectively started with the state, the state prosecutor pursuing these guys in 1980. And it effectively continues into the year 2020, 40 years later, surviving Janet Reno, surviving witness tampering, all of these things that you're going to cover in the doc. Tell us when it hits. Tell us what you're thinking. Tell us the state of play, whatever you can.
It is actually the saga that we had originally wanted to be the subject of the first Cocaine Cowboys documentary. But because the trials were ongoing at the time, the cases were ongoing, we weren't able to get the access we needed. So we ended up making the documentary involving some other characters and something we always wanted to come back to. And we've been working on this project for close to a dozen years now. I can't tell you too much about it just yet because we don't have an announcement ready. It's funny, in our business, in the documentary business, we don't talk about our upcoming projects until we are on the eve of release, unlike the film business, the traditional narrative film business, which likes to promote their projects way in advance. For us, it's a matter of dotting our I's and crossing our T's and making sure that we've nailed the story properly. So I will tell you, though, that it will be out in 2021, and we would love to come back and talk to you all about it.
Billy, throw me a bone. I mean, you guys have been unusually coy about this, and everybody in Miami is asking about it. Like, when is it going to hit? When is it going to hit? Because this gets talked about so much. These guys, to some degree, among Mariel refugees and other people who grew up in Miami, had a Robin Hood swashbuckling type reputation. They get snabbed in 1991 in the biggest cocaine bust in Miami history, and that saga. Actually, the pursuit of these guys through the 1980s, the subterfuge, the back and forth drama, the corruption, the informants. Again, it's really the story of Miami. It's irresistible. And I know you guys get messaged about it daily, but it's like this Manhattan Project that you have to keep under wraps.
I know it comes up all the time for you in the circles you run in, Robin. You're just a cocaine cowboy kind of guy. But I in fact, I'm pretty surprised Alfred said as much as he did. I thought we were on total embargo right now. It has come up a lot through the years because, like Alfred said, we've been working on it for almost 12 years. And so it has come up as a dream project, as a labor of love. And it's something that we actually carried for a long time on our own. 537 we only carried for less than a year, but this one we carried for much longer. And now we've got some great partners on it and are finishing, putting the finishing touches on it for 2021. I'm very excited about it, and I'm very excited to come back to Full Disclosure to tell you all about it.
Oh, I mean, come on, Billy, think back.
As soon as we all successfully survive 2020.
Well, here's the deal. Think back, both of you, to 2008 when I'm interviewing you for Business Week at your favorite restaurant, Joe Allen, the dearly departed Joe Allen in Miami Beach. You're tucking into meatloaf and potatoes and whatever it is, and you would have said, wow, someday you're going to interview me again and I'm going to be beholden to kind of non-disclosure and conformity. You guys were openly disdainful of all the stuff that Hollywood goes through. Now, Alfred, your dear late dog, you said we were so lean that I gave my dog credits on our documentary, like in the end on the Chiron. Surely there's more that you can tell me, because everybody is asking me. They're like, short of bribing me to get you guys to release it. Not that I have any sway, but anything else? Really, anything else you can throw us without violating confidentiality?
Robin, do you think we would have made it to our 20-year anniversary if we weren't able to keep good secrets?
And hence you see how.
Yes. Can I just? I want to do a quick. You're listening to Non-Disclosure.
Oh, no, that's terrible.
Robin, so we will definitely come back and when Muchachos is ready and talk about how if the federal government had put as much time and effort into nailing the Sacklers as they did to Willie and Sal, a couple 100,000 Americans might still be alive.
You're talking about the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma and the opioid crisis.
That's correct.
Drug dealers. He's talking about drug dealers.
Yes. Well, in the few minutes we do have left, I'd love to get your predictions for the next year for the industry. I mean, this is, again, 12 years after I interviewed you. I got back in touch because, gosh, I mean, who would have thought it would have taken a pandemic and all of these other things to truly accelerate what was going on and to make things like Zoom suddenly common and normal and the fact that we can produce remotely. What do you see happening over the next 2-5 years? I mean, in the interest of always having you back on the show.
Well, let's talk about some good news first. Billy alluded to it earlier. I am very bullish on 2021, assuming that we can get the vaccine into enough Americans' arms. I think that there is going to be a pent-up demand that is about to explode. And from an entertainment perspective, think about all the touring musicians, the touring bands, the Rolling Stones of the world, the guys who go out on the summer sheds every year, the guys like Jimmy Buffett who have to tour every year, who lost all that revenue this year. As soon as it's safe to go out, I think we are going to have a boom in live music. I mean, I'm thinking we're going to have, we'll have concerts every night of the week because every touring musician who lost all that revenue in 2020 is going to be out on the road as soon as humanly possible. So I think the experiences, the entertainment experiences that are going to be available by late 2021, early 2022, I think we're headed into the roaring 20s, assuming that, that we don't have any sort of a further economic shock and maybe the commercial real estate market doesn't crater and student debt gets solved. I think we're in for a good few years.
I've been remiss, and it's way too late to get into it, but I never got into OnlyFans or Cameo. Jeez. I mean, to talk about that, if we got back to that original interview in 2008 and say you could truly cut to the chase to the content creator, the bandwidth and the ubiquitousness of webcams and everything, that's for a whole other interview. But this is truly a transformational year in terms of media production.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that goes without saying, and I think that the streaming revolution, thanks to the pandemic, has accelerated in the same way that the Great Recession buried the DVD and forced the entertainment industry into the digital world. I think that this will just embolden the streamers, and I think we're going to see a lot more investment and a lot more focus on streaming internationally at this point.
And hopefully we'll see further democratization of production and a wider variety of talent getting into the game. I think one of the products of the pandemic is, I think people will still crave the competence and professionalism of, well-produced TV and content. We've watched a lot of shows done from home, hosts literally hosting from home and in what really amount to kind of glorified, Instagram live conversations, and some of them have been damn great. I think The Daily Show has been as good, if not better than ever. I think Stephen Colbert has been as good, if not better than ever. I thought SNL from quarantine was brilliant, actually. I thought the limitations, as we've always said as independent filmmakers, limitations breed creativity. And so I think we've seen a lot of creativity through this, and then the audience's threshold for kind of what we're willing to watch in terms of professionalism and competency has been not compromised in a bad way, but compromised to kind of allow for more voices and more different kinds of content that might not be at peak production levels of production value. And I think that's exciting. Too, the kind of new voices and new personalities and new talent that might be able to enter, the world of content creation as a result of, I think, the pandemic sort of accelerating market trends and, of course, demanding creative solutions.
I gotta tell you, boys, in closing, it never gets old for me. I get in the car, fire up the Bluetooth, fire up the Spotify, and over my data plan, it would have been unthinkable back when we were downloading on Napster and LimeWire that you could have pretty much any song ever made at your fingertips on demand, right? On subscription. Your prophecies and then some were very true back at the turn of the century and in 2008. And I can't wait to see where you where you enfant terribles will be in 10 years. Billy Corben and Alfred Spellman of Raconteur, makers of a bunch of hits, including Cocaine Cowboys, ESPN's The U, 537 votes on HBO Max, and upcoming, even though we're never supposed to utter a word about it, Cocaine Cowboys, Los Muchachos. Thank you so much. As you know, you are always welcome on this show.
Thanks for having us, Robin.
Thank you, Robin.
Full disclosure, special thanks to Claire Morgan at Notterly. Subscribe to Full Disclosure on all fine podcatchers, including NPR One, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts at linkfulldradio.com. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at FullDRadio. Thank you for listening. I'm Robin Farzad, back with you next week.